Bravo. Last night we learned that, like we have at Easter time when we say Christos Anesti and we respond by saying Alithos Anesti, there's also a greeting for Christmas. And in Christmas we say Christos Yanate and the response is Doxasate. In English, Christ is born, rejoice is the response. This is a time in which we gather as a community to offer our thanksgiving to God for his incarnation. He deemed through the prophecy that he would become a human being. And so we celebrate this beautiful day together. Last night, a beautiful time at the great Vespers of the feast day, and today the receiving of Jesus Christ in Holy Communion into our bodies. It's a beautiful time to reconnect with God. It is really a time in Christmas of great joy. You know the carol, Joy to the World. There's all kinds of hymns in the church, even the hymn that I just said, Christos Yanate, Doxasate. So this is a day of joy, of happiness. We should be smiling, we should be expressing our hara to one another, and not to be downtrodden and with our faces drawn. Completely the opposite. Some people say that in the Orthodox Church, why are all the icons with the people with their faces in a sorrowful way? And I think that's a good question in the church. A good question. Because Jesus was a man of joy. As a matter of fact, in the Gospel of St. John, in the 10th chapter, he says that he came to bring joy to the world, his joy. Not as the world gives it, but as he gives it. And so that people might have his joy and have life abundantly. Some people might think that Jesus went around again sorrowfully. I don't think so, especially since he calls himself a bridegroom. And I'm sure that you've been to marriages where the bridegroom is waiting for his bride to come down the aisle. I don't think it would look good if the bridegroom had a sorrowful face as his wife or his bride is coming down the aisle. So if Jesus is a bridegroom, I'm sure he had hara, expectations of his bride, the church. So we have to unite with Christ. Of course, we need to be sorrowful about our sins, but joyful that he has come, connected to us, and given us his greatest of gifts, which I want to speak to you briefly this morning. In order for us to smile a little bit, I know that as Greek Orthodox it's difficult, as I've said to you that I prefer to preach in a Baptist church. I prefer it. And whenever I get asked to speak in a Baptist church, I always say yes. Sometimes I say no in Orthodox churches, especially if I know that the congregation is very stale. I don't like it. But when you go to a Baptist church and you preach, if they like what you're saying, you know it right away. In the Orthodox church, you never know how people are for some reason or another. I don't know why. St. John Chrysostom oftentimes would actually reprimand the congregation. If you read his sermons, there are times when he would say something very heavy, and he would reprimand the people. He would say, why, don't you like what I'm saying? Why aren't you clapping? Which tends to tell us that during the time of sermons of Chrysostom, people actually clapped for his sermons. In other words, they expressed their joy of the things that he was saying. So let me share something with you that I hope will make you smile a little bit. It's a story, anecdote of a cafeteria, a children's cafeteria. You can imagine now a cafeteria and all the children are in line, and as they're going through the cafeteria line, one of the nuns put a sign on the apples. So as they're coming through, there's a sign on the apples, and it says, "Take only one, Jesus is watching." So the children are coming, they're taking one apple, putting it in, and at the end of the line, there are a stack of cookies. And one of the children had written a little note next to the cookies. And the children said, "Take all that you want. Jesus is back there watching the apples." So the question is, what do we want? What do you want for Christmas? Isn't that really the question that you hear oftentimes from people? Not necessarily apples or cookies, but other things, gifts. We have expectations, we have desires, and when we're little, we write notes and we say, "I'd like this, I'd like that." I went online and I found a website that lists the most popular gifts since 1970. Let me share some of them with you, they'll make you laugh. 1970, guess what the top gift was in 1970? A Nerf ball. Just a Nerf ball. Some of you might say, "What's a Nerf ball?" You know those soft balls? That was the #1 gift then. Number 2 was Risk. You know the game Risk? And number 3, this will really make me laugh, is a talking Viewmaster. I shared that with my son. He goes, "What's that? What's a Viewmaster?" Remember? You would put it on your eyes and you go like this and the thing would turn. Well, in 1970, if it talked, that was the 3rd most popular gift of the year. Not that long ago, really, 1970. But the Nerf ball was #1. Surprising. 1974, jump a few years, it was Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Remember that? Remember that? They were robots and they would fight, and you could control them as to how they would fight. Number 2 was the Magic 8 Ball. Remember, you would take it, a black, and you would spin it, you would shake it, and it would say yes, no, this or the other thing. And Twister. So Twister came out in 1974, was the 3rd most popular game at that time. 1975 will make you laugh. The Pet Rock. Whoever came up with that, someone told me it was a Greek person that came up with that. Just a rock in a box, and you took care of it, and it became the #1 gift back then. And Monopoly was number 3. Hungry Hippos, 1978. 1980, the Rubik's Cube. Remember the Rubik's Cube? Some of us might still have it. 1980. Star Wars, 1981. Pound Puppies in 1984. Remember those? Pound Puppies, people actually collected them after a while. Trivial Pursuit in 1985. Laser Tag, 1986. If you have this, it's worth money right now. 1989, the Batmobile. If you have the Batmobile in the original box, I understand it's worth a lot of money. Power Rangers in 1994. And then from 1995 all the way to today, since 1995, every single one of them has to do with electronics, but in particular, they have to do with video games. Video games. Every single one of those years, video games. And they got more and more and more sophisticated. I did a little research to find out why is that, and psychologists are saying because you can play out your inner issues through video games. If you're an angry person, if you're a possessive person, if you're a builder, if you're whatever it is, you pick out games and you can play out your fantasies. You can play out your inner issues, if you like. And that's why I like, in many ways, this year's. Does anybody know what this year's is? The #1 game?
Red Dead Redemption.
Yes. That's it. Rob, do you have it?
No.
You have #1? You want #2, right? You hope you get it, you know. Red Dead Redemption. And you say, Tinafto, Red Dead Redemption. See, as a priest, it's my business. I should know. I have to know what's going on in society so I can talk to young people, so I can speak intelligently when I'm at parties, so I can offer the message of Christ as opposed to what society says. But this game is very interesting. It is the most expensive game ever created. It's number 2 of the series, the same series. It took 5 years to create. It's set in a fictional western town in 1899. And it follows an individual in the Wild West. And this is what makes it interesting. By the way, in 1 week, it sold $800 million. In 1 week. 17 million copies in 2 weeks. I mean, just imagine the money that we're talking about. So the question is why? What makes this game so popular? Redemption. Just like the game says, the title. It's about a man who was an evil person. He was a criminal. And he gets an opportunity in the game to become a better person. And so as you play the game and you interact with people in the game, you have a choice. You can make choices based on morality, good choices, or you can make poor choices. If you make good choices and you are a moral person, the game gives you certain powers, certain benefits. If you are an immoral person and do immoral things, the game declines. Isn't it interesting? A game about morality, a game about redemption, at Christmas time, the most powerful game, the most famous game, popular game for 2018. Isn't it interesting then? For me it is. In the Apostolo, the epistle lesson today, it says that Jesus was born. God sent forth his Son, it says. Why? To redeem those under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons and daughters of God. This is it. The gift, which is really above all gifts, is to be redeemed, just like this game. To be an evil person, a bad person, a criminal in the game, and try to redeem yourself by morality. It doesn't work, my friends. You cannot make yourself good. You can try, but we all fall short. That's the reason why God became man. There was no other way. St. Paul says, no one was without sin, no, not one. Even the Panagia, his own mother, needed her son for salvation. So there's no way that we can save ourselves. God had to become man. He had to die on the cross. He had to redeem us, as it says here. But notice, if the psychologists are correct, and this game is the most popular, it says something about what is going on in human beings. We recognize that we are sinful. We recognize that there's something wrong in our world, and we need something, somehow, even if it's a virtual game, to help us, to save us. The more you realize, let me say this clearly, the more you realize how much you need Christ, the more you will want to receive Holy Communion. The less you think you need Christ, the less you receive Holy Communion. Let that sink in for a minute to you. In other words, let me put it another way. If, God forbid, all of us contracted a terminal disease and we would die in a week, if someone came forward and said, if you stand on your right foot on Mondays, and if you stand only on your left foot on Tuesdays, and you alternate your feet every day, you will not die. How many of us would do that? Every single one. Why? Because we don't want to die. We acknowledge that the solution is important. Otherwise, the result, the impact, is bad. When Jesus says, "He who does not eat of my body and drink of my blood has no life in him," what is he saying? He's saying that if we do not take in his body and his blood, we have no life. And the disciples, when they heard him say that, what did he say? What did they say? That is a hard statement, they said to him. Who can take it? And then Jesus says, what is impossible for man is possible for God. What he is trying to say is that you cannot save yourself. The only way to save yourself is, in a sense, stand on one foot, stand on the left foot, receive Holy Communion. If people say, well, you have to fast, or you need to do this, or all these rules in order to receive communion, I would still do everything I needed to do in order to receive. Why? Because I have no life in me. This is the gift. This is the most important gift of Christ's incarnation. There is no other gift other than redemption, to become sons and daughters of Jesus Christ. This is the key that unlocks the joy. Otherwise, you're going to go through life wondering, what am I going to get? What can I find? Where can I live? Who can I be with that will give you the hara, that the emptiness that is inside? This is the message of Christmas, ultimately. The gift giving, ultimately, is that all gifts are short. They fall short. They don't fulfill. They don't redeem, other than to be sons and daughters of God, redeemed, made whole again because of Christ. There is a story which is very interesting because it might parallel this book, this video game, Red Redemption. It was written near the beginning of this century, last century, I should say. It was written, and again it was about a western town, very interesting. And the western town had all men in it. It was a mining town. The name of the story, in case you want to take a look at it on your own, is The Luck of Roaring Camp. Famous story. It's not a long story, it's a short story. There's a movie that was made about it many, many, many decades ago. But in this story, it's a mining camp out west. And no one is in this mining camp except for men. And all the men are fighting each other. You can imagine how dirty they are. You can imagine how all they care about is making money, finding something, they're prospectors, except for one woman, an Indian woman. And this Indian woman, in order to make a livelihood, you can imagine, she did the only thing that she knew how to do, she became a prostitute. One day she became pregnant. And in this story, she gave birth to a little girl, and the mother died in childbirth. So here is this little girl now, this baby, among all of these men in this town. No one knows who the father is. So they begin to take care of this little infant baby girl. And they take some rags that they had, dirty rags, and they put the baby in a box, a wooden box, where they used to keep dynamite. And they realized they can't do this. So one of them actually rode 80 miles to go buy a crib, and brought a crib back. They put the baby in the crib, and they realized they can't have the dirty rags around. Someone else got in on their horse and went to another town and bought some linens and some blankets. Finally, they put the baby in the linen and the blankets in the crib, and they realized they can't leave the baby in this room. Dirty floors, bad ceiling, no cortinas, no curtains. And so these mining men went out and painted, cleaned the floor, got on the floor. They put new curtains up. They fixed the house in order to keep this baby protected. Then they realized that they can't leave the baby alone. And so when they would go to the mine, they took the baby with them and put it in the crib near the entrance of the mine. And they would take turns watching the baby as the others worked. They also learned that because the mine looked so bad, they would put some flowers and create a garden outside of the garden, out of the mine for the baby. In time, the baby was scared when the baby would see them the way they were with their beards, and they weren't clean in their hair. They began to wash themselves, clean themselves. They would not argue anymore. All because of the baby. The entire city and the people changed their lives. The story ends with an entire town that used to be an evil town, redeemed, changed. They became good men, caring for one another because of a little baby that was born and accepted in their locale. Isn't it the same with us? We need to accept Jesus Christ as the child into our hearts. And if we accept Jesus Christ into our hearts, everything can change. We will be careful how we speak. We will be careful where we go. We will be careful how we treat one another. We will want the inside of our house to be clean, pure, pleasant for Christ to be inside. Do you see why it's important to take Holy Communion? The more we take Holy Communion, the more responsible we will be for the condition of our home. The more we keep him outside, the more we can almost convince ourselves that, well, I don't have to do this or that because I'm not, quote, receiving communion on Sunday. That is not the Orthodox way. The Orthodox way is to always be with the Lord, and that is the reason why we have liturgies in the church every week, every day of the week, not just on Sundays, but we have forgotten this tradition. Let me end by just telling you what St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil said. I think they are the authorities, I would think. We use St. Basil's liturgy and we use St. John Chrysostom's liturgy. They were asked by their people, how many times should I receive Holy Communion? Good question. It's a question that people ask me. And I answer them the way that these two saints answered the people. Do you know what they said? As for us, they said, we receive 5 times a week Holy Communion. We receive 5 times a week. But it's up to you, he said, how many times you think you need Christ to be inside of you. If St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil needed redemption as much as they did, you can imagine how much more we need Christ to give us life. I hope and pray that you have a beautiful Christmas with your families. I hope and pray you have great joy. I offer this sermon to you to make you think a little bit during the Christmas time. It is my responsibility so that we can all be, as we say, our Father. We can be sons and daughters of the Most High. Please rise.